We live in a very masculine world that relies on rigid structure and routine, which isn't a bad thing because we need structure to thrive. But when there's almost too much rigidity and structure, there's not a lot of room for playfulness, creativity, intuition, and flow. But then on the other end of it, when there's too much flow and not enough structure, that's when things feel chaotic and you don't get a lot done. I've been on both ends of the extreme, and I've really learned how to balance both. We need the masculine structure so that we're actually getting things done and keeping commitments to ourselves and to others. But at the same time, we also need to honor our energy levels and our intuition, especially as women, because we go through so many different hormonal changes throughout the month that we can't expect ourselves to show up the same daily. So in today's video, we'll be talking about building discipline in a way that honors both structure and flow. So if you watched my previous video all about discipline, that was almost like a general overview of building discipline. This video, we're going to be kind of talking a lot about having that structure and that routine while also allowing space for playfulness and flow to come in. I'll be sharing practical ways that have really helped me stay committed to my goals while also honoring my energy levels and my intuition. If you like these kinds of videos, definitely make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the little notification bell, and without further ado, let's get into it. So like I mentioned, we need structure in our lives, and typically we get that structure from our jobs. You know, you have to work around your work schedules to get other things done in your life. But if you're an entrepreneur or you work from home, it can be difficult to create that structure for yourself. And that's something that I have really struggled with as an entrepreneur. I've gone through periods of time where I'm like, I don't want any structure. I'm just gonna let myself do whatever I want, whenever I want. And that sounds nice in theory, but really it was actually so chaotic. I was so unorganized. I got nothing done. But then on the other end of it, I've used tools like time blocking to literally schedule in every single task that I'm doing, like by the minute. And that has also really overwhelmed me because it's felt almost like too rigid to a point where if it took me too long to finish a task because I wasn't as focused, then it would almost like throw the rest of my day off, because then I would have to push off other things. So how do you balance both? How do you create that structure and actually get things done while also allowing space for flow, for your intuition, for your energy? Something I've really learned is that when you're creating your schedule, you need to allow space for flow. So I'm going to give you a couple of different practical ways that you can do this. These are things that have really helped me. So instead of scheduling out specific tasks and like time blocking my entire day, what I have found that has helped me a lot more is grouping together similar tasks and calling them like a time block. So like I have a content creation block. I have a business development block where I will focus on outreach and client engagement. I have a learning block where I'll focus on learning a new skill, watching modules, watching trainings. I have found that this has worked a lot better for me than like having a set list of specific tasks that I need to do every single day. Instead, it feels better to almost have like themed tasks. So I'm gonna do a content creation block every day, but it may look different every single day. You know, today it could be writing, tomorrow it could be filming, the next day it could be editing. The next tip is to plan out your day based on your energy levels. So if you're a morning person, tackling the hardest things in the morning when you have a lot of energy, that works best. Or if you're a night person, waiting until the end of the day to do your more difficult task or your more creative task, because you know that that is when you feel more creative or more productive. So for me, I find it easiest to do the hard things first thing in the morning. It's a concept called Eat the Frog, where you essentially tackle the most important thing of the day to free up mental clarity for the rest of the day. So usually the first thing I'll do every day is some type of creative task or something that feels a little bit more daunting, a little bit more challenging, so that way I use my mental energy for that difficult task rather than pushing it off to later. Because if I push it off until later, it's not going to get done. So usually for me, that looks like creating content or engaging with ideal clients, things that take a little bit more of my energy. I reserve those for the beginning of the day. And then later on in the day, I'll do more like admin work, more behind the scenes stuff like responding to emails, things that don't really require as much mental energy or as much creative energy. Another tip too is to allow space for flow days each week. So if you work Monday through Friday, then having one of your weekend days be a flow day. And a flow day is essentially a day where you just follow whatever it is that you want to do. You know, you don't set an alarm, you don't give yourself too many responsibilities, like you just allow yourself to be. I feel like I need at least one of these days a week. It really just fills up my cup, just allowing myself to sleep in, move at my own pace, do whatever it is that I want that day. And I usually find that on those days I am my most creative, so I'll always end up doing like some type of creative task, whether it's like prepping for a YouTube video or journaling or thinking of ideas. That's typically when those things will come to me, because I feel my most like creatively nourished when I'm just flowing. But again, we don't want to have too much flow, because too much flow also takes out creativity. I have found that when I have too much flow and not enough like structure, my creativity is nowhere to be found. So it's a very like interesting balance. Another practical tip for balancing structure with flow is to set intentions rather than goals. So something my yoga teacher literally says every single week is, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Sometimes setting specific goals each day can feel too rigid, especially if you can be a little bit of a perfectionist or have like an all or nothing mindset. If you don't complete that goal, that specific goal that day, you'll beat yourself up by the end of the day. So instead, something that's a little bit more flowy but also still allows for that structure is setting intentions. So maybe instead of setting a specific goal like writing 3 blogs, you can set the intention to create like a dedicated time for writing. I have really found that this works best on days when it's a little bit more difficult for me to show up. There are some days where I have a lot of energy and I'm like, okay, I know that I can set this goal for myself and actually achieve it. Like, I'm very confident in that. But then there's days where I'm a little bit more tired, I'm not as focused, maybe I didn't sleep that well, maybe I'm like getting close to my period, whatever it is, it's a little bit more difficult for me to show up. So that's when setting intentions is a lot better. And then the last tip for this is to have flexible and light boundaries. So something I heard on the Mindset Mentor podcast is that we are rebellious by nature. So whenever we tell ourselves not to do something, we want to do it even more. And I notice this when it comes to food. So I don't do well with restriction. I really don't like restricting any type of food, because I notice that when I restrict food, I just want it even more. So for me, what works best is having light boundaries, having flexible boundaries. So something you can do instead of setting like hard, non-moving boundaries is setting light and flexible boundaries. So for example, setting a boundary, no screens after 8 p.m., but allowing yourself the exception if, you know, you want to watch a movie with your friends one night. Not being so rigid to be like, no, I can't watch TV after 8 p.m. It's like, no, like allowing yourself that flexibility. Like sometimes you may want to watch a movie late at night, sometimes you may want to scroll, and like it's okay. I talked about this in my video on how to build discipline, so I'll leave that up here and down in the description box if you want to watch that video. But something that I shared in that video is that discipline is not about perfection, it's about consistency. Especially as women, since our hormonal changes fluctuate so much throughout the month, we need to be a little bit more gentle with ourselves in certain phases of our cycle. So I'm going to leave some resources down below all about your cycle, just in case you're not as familiar with the different changes that we experience throughout our cycle. But I am going to share with you kind of just like a general overview and how you can essentially plan your work to optimize your cycle. So as women, we have a 28-day cycle that goes through 4 phases: menstrual, follicular, ovulation, and luteal phase. So the first phase of our cycle is our menstrual phase, and that's our period. So that is typically when your energy is going to be at its lowest. And this is a really good time for rest and reflection and doing light activities like yoga and walking. And then once you get off your period, you enter the follicular phase. So this is when your energy starts to rise and we start to regain our energy. So this is a good time to start setting goals, planning, and taking on more challenging things like strength training or high intensity workouts, because you'll be a lot more energized. And then after your follicular phase, you go into your ovulation phase, and this is like your peak energy. This is when your estrogen and testosterone are at its peak, so you're gonna feel your most confident, your most social. I love my ovulation phase. I feel like that girl when I'm ovulating. And this is when it's best to tackle your most difficult tasks, because you will feel your most productive. This is usually when I go hard on my social events, filming, and just things that involve me putting myself out there, because that's when I feel my best. It's when I feel my most confident. And then after your ovulation phase is when you enter your luteal phase. So this is when your energy will slowly start to dip as your body prepares itself for the menstrual cycle. So this is a time to focus on winding down, completing any projects that you started, leaning into more reflective activities and slower forms of movement. You can still be disciplined, but it's really important to be mindful of your energy levels. This is honestly, for me, where I notice that I have my most difficulty with staying disciplined is during my luteal phase, especially in my late luteal phase. That's when it's most challenging for me because I still have energy, but at the same time, if I push myself too much in my late luteal phase, it will affect like my PMS symptoms. And I have had like PMDD in the past, and I have found that I've just found a lot of ways to kind of help work with my hormones. I can definitely create another video on that if you guys are interested in just like my whole journey to like naturally healing my hormones, because I feel like I've learned a lot about that stuff throughout the years. But I really recommend tracking your cycle and becoming very mindful of how you are throughout your cycle as your body goes through these different hormonal changes. I feel like I've learned so much about myself, and I learned how to really show up for myself in each phase of my cycle. I'm still learning how to show up for myself properly when it comes to my luteal phase. I feel like I still do struggle with like my late luteal phase. Like I'm not perfect at all, but I don't know if it's just like a woman thing. I just feel like even though we experience our cycle every single month, it's almost like when it happens, like when PMS symptoms come up, it's almost like we forget. I don't know if that's just me, but so when you start tracking your cycle and you become more aware of your patterns throughout your cycle, you can then start to work with your hormonal changes. So here are some ways you can do this. Plan your workout routine and your schedule each week based on what phase of your cycle you're in. So I know that when I'm in my late luteal phase, it's a little bit more difficult for me to do high intensity workouts, and it does not serve my body to do high intensity cardio when I'm in my late luteal phase. So while I'm planning out my week and my schedule for the week, if I know that I'm in my late luteal phase, I will plan workouts that will be good for my body in that time period. Same with any events that are on my schedule. I might not do anything super crazy during that week. I might choose not to do that many social activities, especially if it's late luteal phase, and especially if it's a little bit more of a challenging one where I am kind of struggling with a lot of PMS symptoms. I find that it's best to kind of keep to myself. Another thing you can do too is aligning your work and your task with your cycle. So using your follicular and ovulatory phase for tackling big tasks, doing things that require a lot of energy. So if you're a content creator, or if you do something that involves you speaking on camera, like I have found that for me, it's best for me to film my content when I'm either in my follicular or my ovulation phase, or at least put more of it on my plate when I'm in those phases. I can still film in my late luteal and in my menstrual phase, but just not that many, because it's a little bit harder for me to gather my thoughts and to speak coherently sometimes. And then during the luteal and your menstrual phase, focusing more on like reflective activities, administrative work, behind the scenes things. And then when you're scheduling like social and self-care activities, scheduling them while you're in your ovulation phase, because that's when you'll feel your most energized and your most confident. And then during your luteal and menstrual phase, prioritizing restful, light activities, things that fill your cup up, self-care. I've given a lot of practical tips in this video, but the most important thing when it comes to being self-disciplined while also embracing your feminine energy and allowing for that flow is to be self-compassionate and also be flexible and be willing to adapt, pivot, and overcome setbacks. So for me, I really like to take it day by day. If I'm having an off day and it's really difficult for me to show up for myself, I'll focus on my minimums that day. I'll focus on the things that I absolutely need to do, and I'll maybe save the things that are a little bit more challenging for me to do for a later date. And I know it can sometimes be challenging, but you really can't beat yourself up on those low or off days, because it happens, it's inevitable, especially if your sleep is affected, or you know that your period is coming, or you know that your energy levels are being affected for some reason, just knowing that you can support yourself in any way that you need right now, and that will help you get through it so that you can show up even better tomorrow or the next week. I think that when it comes to self-discipline, it is definitely possible to continue to show up for yourself while still allowing space for your energy levels, your intuition, your creativity, and your flow to come in. I really don't think that both of them have to be mutually exclusive and that they can't coexist together. It's just about finding that balance that works best for you and really knowing yourself. A lot of this just involves knowing yourself, being very self-aware, and being willing to adapt and being willing to be flexible. So I really hope that this video was helpful. Let me know in the comments down below if you liked it, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.